Welcome to Horns Up. I'm Animesh,
And I'm Peter.
and we're finally breaching the confines of traditional heavy metal to celebrate an album that, till date, remains one of the most perplexing yet aggressive, melodic, and well, just plain intelligent listens of all time. Yes, we're celebrating the 20th birthday of System of a Down's second studio album, Toxicity.
Yes, Toxicity was released on the 4th of September 2001, and I dare say it remains one of the most relevant albums even today. It's a rare metal album where the lyrics and what the songs say are as important, if not even more, than the riffs and the music itself.
Toxicity also remains by far System of a Down's most popular and best selling album. And of course, a lot of that has to do with the three singles. Chop Suey, Toxicity, and those songs have introduced countless listeners to the band and continue to do so. It's claimed numerous accolades, be it being featured at number 44 on Rolling Stone's 100 Best Albums of the Decade for the 2000s, or get this, the fact that it's been picked as favorite albums by Spice Girl Mel C, who's better known as Sporty Spice. Yes.
Body Spice. Yeah.
Needless to say, Toxicity deserves to be talked about and to be celebrated, and that's exactly what Peter and I are going to do. So let's start off with our individual System of a Down experiences. Peter, are you a fan? Were you ever a fan? How did you hear of the band? And do you remember the first time you heard Toxicity?
Yeah, I can never forget the first time I heard Toxicity, to be honest, because I didn't hear the album. And this is, I think, a recurring story of mine from the early 2000s. A friend of mine, I must say, Clint Pinto, he was the only guy who had a CD burner back then in Abu Dhabi. So, of course, he was the de facto guy for all the music. So he would keep Kaza and LimeWire. I think LimeWire was later, but Kaza and Napster, he would keep downloading all these singles. And he kind of said that, oh, you like, heavier music? I've put together this compilation mix. Check it out. And there were a bunch of songs. I mean, there was Lost Prophets, there was Korn, there was Limp Bizkit, and then suddenly there was Chop Suey in the middle of it. And like the moment I say Chop Suey, I'm sure everyone has already in their head kind of heard that intro bit, right? Which starts off. And when you go from track to track, right? Obviously on a mix CD, this is going to stand out. So I was like, who the hell are these guys? And like, what's going on? And as the song progresses, I just kept getting more and more confused. By the end of the song, I was like, fuck, I have to figure out who these guys are, right? And this was the time I was like, of course, listening to a lot of new metal, but this was far different than anything that was being released back then. Fast forward, so I never heard the entire album because I don't know, for some reason, none of my friends were into it, so nobody had the entire album. But fast forward to a couple of years ago, and now I'm living in Canada, and I just moved there, and there was another international student, get this, from Colombia, and we're getting to know each other. And his English is, I'd say, like, his Spanish was far better than his English, but he was like, we could communicate. And we started getting to know each other, usual what music you listen to. And I was like, hey, he's like, hey, you listen to metal. Do you like System of a Down? And I was like, what? He's like, yeah, dude, pogo, 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 pogo. And I was like, wow. So I was like, hey, by the way, do you have that album? He's like, no problem. Next class, I'll give it to you. So he burnt that entire CD for me. And I think for the next week or 10 days, because those were one of the few early CDs I had, I kept listening to it over and over again. And it's crazy just how, this is one of those instances where, metal truly transcends language and borders, right? This is one of the things. Who would have thought like an Indian guy and a Colombian guy sitting in Canada, Toronto of all places, are talking about a band like System of a Down? So, yeah, that's my story. But, I'm going to pull the curtains back, honestly, because when Animesh, you suggested that we talk about System of a Down and Toxicity, I was like, what? I'm not sure this is the album that I thought you even liked. So I'm going to put it up front. What's your deal with System of a Down and more specifically Toxicity?
Okay, so yeah, you got me there. I'm not a System of a Down fanboy as such. Never have been. Yes, the first couple of songs that I heard from the band were Toxicity and Chop Suey, and honestly, this was in college. and I was just weirded out by what was happening. I couldn't really place them anywhere. It was just too much of a mishmash of so many different things, and it's kind of like the reaction that I had with these songs is kind of like the general reaction people have with death metal or Cannibal Corpse, etc., or DI side, where you really don't know what the fuck is going on and it just sounds like noise. Eventually, in college itself, that's when Mesmerize and Hypnotize was also available. A friend of mine really liked those albums, and so gave me the MP3s or whatever to listen to, and I ended up hearing the albums, and I was like, hey, this isn't really bad if you move beyond the first layer of just what the fuckery about it. But still, that didn't mean that I heard Toxicity right there and then. It was only a bit later that I actually got the album and decided to give System of a Down some chance, and started listening to the album. But then again, I wasn't a huge fan of it. I maybe heard it once or twice and just left it. Weirdly enough, now this is a surprising story because I'm pretty sure nobody else, at least you wouldn't know of anybody who's had a similar experience. Listeners, please do let me know if any of you have had this kind of an experience. While driving from Navi Mumbai to town, I decided one day, let's play System of a Down, right? And let's play Toxicity. And I was also dropping my mom off to wherever she needed to go. And so after Prison Song gets over, she asks me, hey, which band was that? And I was like, this is System of a Down. She was like, okay, is it an Indian band? And I was like, no, this isn't an Indian band. She was like, I thought as much because, the song was, they were talking about prisons and jails and incarceration. And it would be very, like, essentially the words that she said aren't the words that I'm going to be using right now, but essentially she said, or what she meant to say was, this is extremely ballsy for a band to sing about. And I was like, fuck yeah, look at my mom, so fucking cool. Right? Metal mom ever. Like, yeah. Also, happy birthday, mom, but whatever. So yeah, that's when kind of the mental block towards System of a Down slightly opened up a bit more, and I decided to give Toxicity a fair chance. And after delving deeper into the lyrics, etc., that's when I started really appreciating the album. And to date, I guess that's why I decided to pick it, because hey, it's not only good content, but it is actually an album that's worth celebrating because it's influenced millions of musicians at some level.
Like the whole revival that you're having of like the new metal with the grime and the rap and all of that is essentially it, right? I can see where you're coming from, and I know we're going to talk about this later, so I'm going to hold my tongue for right now. But fair enough. I really am glad that your mom dug System of a Down. But so let's.
I know, right?
Didn't see that coming at all. So let's talk about the album. It was recorded at Cello Studios in Hollywood, California, and produced by the one and only Rick Rubin. Toxicity began life with over 30 songs, and which was ultimately whittled down to 14 or 15. Again, depends whom you're talking to, but it makes up 44 minutes of pure sonic adventure.
Yup. Sonic adventure, those are really critical words, because that's, I guess, the apt way to describe what you're hearing on this album, because of the multitude of genres, styles, and elements that it encompasses, right? It's really tough to pinpoint one firm genre as such that this album can be slotted in. So, what label best describes Toxicity?
Man, to be honest, I don't think there's one label that you can put on the album and it'll be like really unfair. So, apologies in advance for that. But it's a mix, I would say, of like thrash metal with folk. And I don't mean like that cheesy folk that, you normally hear. that comes out, right? This is like very authentic and you kind of feel it. I mean, till date, I always find it very strange that System of a Down gets lumped along with, all the new metal acts that came around in the turn of the 2000s, right? Because if you put like your Korn with Limp Bizkit, Linkin Park, System of a Down are nowhere in that sonic palette of sorts, right? Do you think it really belongs there?
No. I was never convinced that System of a Down were new metal. To me, like, new metal was defined by, rap rock or grooves or down-tuned guitars, like really down-tuned guitars. I know System of a Down and Toxicity, most of the songs are in drop C, but still, right, it doesn't sound like a drop C. And of course, new metal, like, there's a characteristic lack of melody in all new metal.
Attack.
So
sorry, I
attack. Okay, whatever. But yeah, System of a Down are just they're just plain weird, man. Like, if I had to label them, I'm guessing it would be alternative metal, which really isn't a metal genre as such. I mean, who else would be alternative metal? Tool? I don't know if Tool isn't metal according to us, but whatever, right? Alternative metal would be RATM, would be what?
I don't know.
Leprous, maybe. Fuck, I don't know, man. Whatever you can't classify becomes alternative for me. Definitely, System of a Down aren't progressive, right?
I see, that's the thing, right? It all depends, because what is truly progressive? If you have to do that, I think we'll have
See, I think System of a Down could be progressive, but I think the world kind of defines progressive as long songs. And that's not a System of a Down trait. So anyways, for me, System of a Down, not new metal. I'll call them alternative metal. That's the only way for me to describe them.
Now, look, I've brought this up in the past, but listeners, long-time listeners would be familiar. I keep talking about like Alice in Chains, right? How they aren't really a grunge band, but kind of got lumped into that group just because of the time they were and all of that, right? I feel System of a Down kind of face the same thing, because, hey, it was easier for marketing executives to slap that tag on them. Kind of, even if you look at the years that they were most active, was when new metal was on their rise of sorts. So it became easy.
And they don't really fit the metal mold. I mean,
like, of sorts. If you just like, we're going to get into the songs, but none of those song structures, if you listen to it, right, told anyone this was new metal, they're like, no, this is not new metal. Like, he's singing clean vocals. There's melody in this.
It sounds good.
And what?
No, man, come on. Yeah. We have to do a new metal episode at some point in time, and definitely we will, because, let's face it, that's a genre of music that did happen, and there was some good music that came out of that. Whatever. Let's actually talk about Toxicity and dive into the songs itself. Now, one of the reasons I genuinely like this album is because of how mature the songs are. Right? You strip away the first layer of what the fuckness as such, and actually what remains is a far more serious kind of a proposition. I mean, the album begins, as I've already said, with a song about mass incarceration. What I think is cool about it, as attested to by my mum, is the fact that, unlike, say, Rage Against the Machine, the song Prison Song by System of a Down, right, the riffs in it, the vocal lines, the different textures, etc., they seem to be designed to make you remember the lyrics or what the song has to say. And I think that's kind of the feel that almost permeates all the songs on Toxicity, because you've got a song about orgies in Bounce, you've got a song about groupies in Psycho, you've got a song about the protests surrounding the 2000 Democratic National Convention in Deer Dance, about mankind's quest for knowledge in Science, about immigration and overpopulation in X, or I don't know, do you call it Multiply, whatever, about mind control in Shimmy, about drug addiction in Needles and in Chop Suey. The lyrics and Serge and Darren's unique, distinctive vocal performance, right? That to me is the USP or the real shine factor of all the songs on Toxicity.
So I have to make a confession. until I actually watched the videos. I thought it was like the
Uh-huh.
vocalist Serge doing all of that. And I was like, holy crap, how does he do that, man? Like he's like going back and it's like so tight, right? The whole frantic pace. And
Yeah.
I was like, how does he sing more than like 5 songs like this in a row? I mean, he's just like fried his vocal cords or what's going on, right? But then, like when you watch the videos, you're like, oh wait, the guitarist is also there. He's the guy doing,
Is also
yeah, yeah,
helping
yeah.
out. Yeah.
But I must say, man, it's those vocal hooks that you're talking about, right? They just get stuck in your head, and there's so much that happens in the song. I mean, I must confess that, like in 2003, 4, when I was like really getting into the band and I started reading up, and they were so vocal about being Armenian, right? And talking
Mm-hmm.
about the awareness about the Armenian genocide and all. And to me, because I was later on going to listen to Rage Against the Machine, I had never heard like metal bands being so vocal about political stuff or just kind of creating the
Yeah.
awareness. I mean, they wore their Armenianness on their sleeve. There wasn't like, you know, and I hate bringing this example, but it's not like, the Sum 41 guys or whatever, where everyone thinks, or Tony Kanal from No Doubt, or like, is he Indian? We're not sure, that kind of thing. These guys are like out there with their national identity. And yeah, the lyrics, man, because the thing is, I feel I totally agree when you come and say that with System of a Down, they actually sang the parts, right? So it's stuck in your head. You listen to it, and the
Yeah.
more and more you listen to it and just think about it, you're just getting more aware. And I think as a teenager, that's really impactful in there. And like, who says like, metal is all about? These guys kind of took that entire stereotype of metal and kind of flipped it around, kind of sticking to what they wanted to do, right? They weren't doing it as a gimmick. They didn't package it in there. Like, it's exactly like you say, the moment you take away that comic bit and all of that, and you just actually spend time with it, it's just so beautiful, honestly.
Yep. It's heavy stuff, right? And that's what's great about it, that the fact that they're using this kind of music to talk about these issues, which is cool. And then if you actually start listening to the music and analyzing that, I have to say this. I think what really sets this album and its songs apart from anything else in existence in metal as such is the contradiction and mashup of all the genres, right? Because I'll be honest here, like, it's not the heavy parts of the album that I am a real fan of. The riffs are pretty much standard riffs. Like, you would have heard these kind of riffs coming from every new metal band
Yeah,
as such. And I guess that's where the riffiness, or that's where the new metal comparison does come in
true.
a bit, right? But what are really impressive to me are the melodies, the folky bits, the off kilter stuff, the layered guitars that Darren uses, the drum fills that aren't really conventional, the bass lines that don't always follow the guitar, the fact that the band were really pushed beyond the limits by producer Rick Rubin, the overindulgence of just, throwing in so many different instruments. There's even a sitar in the
Yeah, yeah.
album. It's such an easy marriage of Middle Eastern as well as Armenian folk sounds, right? There's so much of just raw emotion that's on display on throughout the entire album, especially like on songs like Aerials. The dynamic range and the ever changing parts on almost all the songs, especially highlighted in ATWA, Atwa, Science, Chop Suey, Aerials, Toxicity, hell, even Forest and X to a degree. Yes, of course, you remember the zaniness of the lyrics. I mean, come on, the jet pilot lyric
Yeah,
is something that I'll never forget in my life. Like, after only having heard it once, or even the pogo 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 bounce, whatever, that part, right? They stick out. But overall, like, as an album, Toxicity remains one of the most enjoyable albums to keep revisiting, because hey, you'll actually discover something new that you hadn't ever heard before.
true, man. I mean, like, since you brought up Aerials, that's such a haunting song. And what a ballsy kind of thing to kind of release as a single, right? Because, like, when you hear it, it just leaves you like stunned. And the way they also do it, right? And the album is a bit of a mishmash, I would say, because like compared to most of the music we've celebrated so far, there's a sequence, there's a whole kind of way it's done. This, I don't know, doesn't follow that pattern. I mean, I get, okay, you start off prison song. I heard like the contrast in there. So there's like a, how do I say, a pull and push of sorts that's happening with the listener, where you're just like aggressive and then you just suddenly lay back, and then you again have like this like, a short burst of aggression, and you see that happening in there. But other than that, like thematic, or there's nothing like really to nerd out over, right? That, oh my god, they did this. I mean, can you imagine like a Tool fan going like, bus, that's it? Like there's no like this. But that's the thing, right? They've put it raw, visceral, it's straight up there. The band are on a mission, they've got the message. And I must add, like, it's strange because when I first heard System of a Down, right, I was living in the Middle East. I was in Abu Dhabi at that time. And even for my friends who are, Arabs, or for mixed background, American or British and Arab and all of that, they suddenly started like saying that, hey man, like, have you heard System of a Down? It kind of became that band that, they are Armenian. There's a band from this region. Well, that became a thing where people started even exploring, and especially like people around my age who were starting their bands and things like that. For them, it wasn't about, aping the Iron Maidens and all of that. Now suddenly they had these new heroes, System of a Down, who are actually marrying these sounds that, growing up they would probably not want to listen their parents' records or cassettes and all. Now these guys are doing it, so it's suddenly become cool. And just how seamless, it doesn't seem forced fit, right? It's not like Indian bands who just, acha, we have to call it fusion, so we'll just add a sitar solo in there. It just seems like, of course, there's that initial shock and awe that you're like, what did I hear? How did this happen? But then when you go back and just listen to it, like, and give full attention, you're like, this is genius. This is like sheer smart. Someone has actually thought about this very, very well. And I don't know who. I mean, like, I'd love to say it's Rick Rubin, but I'm sure it's both Darren, because he plays an important role writing a lot of the songs, right? So,
yep. He is the chief music writer as such, and Serge is the chief lyric writer as such, and whatever. But exactly, like, picking up from where you left off, definitely, I agree to the fact that System of a Down kind of pushed the capabilities, or largely the field of what a metal song could be, right? It didn't need to have a traditional structure, and it didn't need to have a singular idea. Of course, a lot of bands have done similar kind of bits and pieces as such. Like, almost all the tech death bands are probably jumping their arms up if they're listening to this kind of a episode right now and saying that, dude, what the fuck, like, come on, jazz, tech death, etc. existed even before System of a Down, so what the fuck are you talking about? But there's a reason why tech death is tech death and has a niche following, and there's a reason why System of a Down has a bigger mass following. And it's because they managed to take the sheer craziness of their ideas and managed to make it work in music that's accepted and somehow transcended into pop culture and mainstream, and that sorts. And it is that fantastic folky stuff, right, on Atwa and Psycho. It is the what the fuckness of version 7.0, and it is wake up, grab a brush and put a little makeup. It is all of that zaniness that really makes the song stand out and stick with you. It is sheer genius.
So we have to talk about like the three singles, right? You've got Toxicity, Chop Suey, and Aerials. I mean, these three songs, of course, were the singles of the album. They got all the videos. But let's be honest, they are by far the most popular System of a Down songs out there. And I can tell you from my experience, because, it's not just the songs that metalheads know. It's also the non-metalheads, right? Like people you saw in college or at work who you never expect to listen to metal, and then you're at a karaoke session or something like that, and they've got the mic singing Aerials, and you're like, what, you listen to metal? Or like, I can't even tell you the number of after parties I've been to where suddenly it's that time of the playlist where you hit into new metal, and someone kind of goes into chop suey and everyone's trying to do that fast rap part in there. It's just crazy how, popular these songs are and everyone knows them.
Yeah, man. But that's the thing, right? They definitely deserve the popularity. I think they're great songs. And I think these three songs, they sit at a higher level than the rest of the songs in the album. And that's probably one of my few minor complaints of the album as such, that it doesn't really flow as a natural album, but instead it seems like a collection of songs. I'll tell you why I'm saying that, because if you imagine that one of these three songs, if they opened the album and were followed up by the other songs as such, would you still end up pushing through the other songs? I'm not quite sure. So, yeah, there's definitely a reason why these were the singles. They are the best songs of the album. Not to say that the others aren't good songs, they are good songs, but yeah.
I don't know. I thought about it, and it's kind of strange, right? I mean, like, I wish I had a different perspective, but it's true. I mean, like, if you think about it, the reason why my friend Clint burnt only two of the songs of Toxicity for me on that mix compilation is because they were the best songs, right? It took me a couple of years to pick up the rest of the album and kind of appreciate it there. But I get where you're coming from, and it's strange, right? Like, why even the placement, just coming back to the sequence of the songs, like these songs are somewhere in the middle of the album. They're not even like, your side A, side B type. It's just somewhere peppered in, and like Aerials comes in like towards the end of the album, which is
Mm-hmm.
puzzling for me, right? Like, you'd have to wait all the way till the end of the album to come across that track. Having said that, let's just look back now and try and understand, what do you think is the legacy of Toxicity, Animesh?
So we know that Toxicity remains the most popular System of a Down album. It's probably their best-selling one too. I think that's a fact. Having said that, I'd say that with Toxicity, the band firmly established their uniqueness, of sorts, and this time they definitely did let the world take notice. Sure, in hindsight, I mean, you could say that the time of release helped. The very fact that within a week you couldn't listen to Chop Suey on the radio as an aftermath of 9/11, or even the band's political nature, and there are various other controversies around the album release that definitely did increase curiosity. Like, I mean, hell, we've all heard stories of the concerts that had to be cancelled because the crowd turnout was double or triple of what people expected, and the band just didn't think it was safe enough to do a concert, right?
I read an article about like the band saying that they didn't expect it, and I think that was one of the moments they realized how popular they've become.
Yeah, but that's the thing, right? That happened all the way back in 2001. But the beauty of Toxicity is the fact that it is super rare for an album to stand the test of time and remain relevant even 20 years later. So I think, like, put it this way, how many albums can say they sound like Toxicity? Very few. But how many bands try to be SOAD? There's a lot of them on the list, and it's only very few that actually manage to do even a half decent job as System of a Down have done. Their influence is clearly visible, right? And the influence of this album is clearly visible on a lot of bands that try to do this kind of a thing.
True. I mean, I was trying to think about like in recent years a band that has kind of come close to doing this metal and folk kind of mix, right? I'm not talking about like cheesy again in there, but just that authentic kind of stick to their roots kind of folk music. And the only band I could think of was Alien Weaponry. And when I think about it, they probably were still in their diapers when Toxicity released, but maybe they've come across it at some point in there and got that as inspiration. But if you think about like the revival of sorts, if you want to call it, of new metal, a lot of bands have kind of you know put out music which sounds very similar, inspired, of course, doing it in their own style. And having said that, I mean, like for me, really the way I remember Toxicity and how popular it was, the release of Mesmerize, Hypnotize. And I still remember because I lived in Toronto at that time, and there's a record store called HMV, which is bang in the center of the city. There was lineups when the album released. Like people lined up. And in today's day and age, it seems like unheard of because no one really lines up for an album release, right? But for me, that was how strong it was. The band had built so much hype. There was so much going, and there was so many. Even they did such a great single with BYOB for Hypnotize, I think, or Mesmerize, I can't remember. And they had that whole artwork which kind of linked together. I mean, there's a lot that they did post that. So kudos to them. And I must say, I mean, like, last year they put out 2 songs, which was Protect the Land and Genocide Humanoids. I was excited, genuinely, like, because it came out of nowhere. And all of a sudden, when I started listening to the songs, I became a teenager again. I mean, it was like, wait, these guys haven't like lost a step at all. And probably they have like 100 songs or something in there. And these were just the 2 that they decided to release and put out. But considering like all that I've read recently, why there's been no subsequent System of a Down albums. It's just that Serge and Darren cannot come on the same page. And I hope they do, man, because there's so much that they can do. I mean, think about it. All the people our age, right, would put down good money just if System of a Down do one final tour or one comeback tour, not a final tour and all of that. Just one tour. What do you say?
Yeah, I get where you're coming from. I mean, that does look like an opportunity to mint money as such, but I don't know, it's weird for me to think of System of a Down as a band that would want to do that for that kind of a reason, right? It's so weird, like having to see Rage Against the Machine reunite for these, I don't know, maybe these precise reasons, whatever, but
Coachella.
yeah, maybe. But the weird thing is, System of a Down, they have become a band that at least definitely can be a good example of how to best represent what you stand for and what your ideals are. And for them to come in and do something that seems like a cash grab wouldn't quite sit well, even though it will sell really well. Honestly, I'm okay if System of a Down never come back for a tour. I'm okay if System of a Down never reunite and release an album, because their body of music, and especially Toxicity, is their legacy. And I don't want them to tarnish that legacy.
True. I get where you're coming from.
So that was our little celebration of Toxicity. Now there's a bunch of homework you all can indulge in to know more about Toxicity. Mainstream publications like Variety and The Ringer have some fantastic stories and interviews that explore the legacy of the album. And of course, metal and music publications have some fantastic reads as well. They're all like chipping in on 20 years of this album. Kerrang and Rolling Stone USA is what I'd recommend. And of course, listen to the album, man. Rediscover it. It's mom approved, definitely. So go ahead, listen back to it and tell us what you thought. As always, you can find us at hornsupod.com or on Twitter at hornsupod. I'm at Asmoani on Twitter.
I'm at Trend Crusher.
Horns up.
Horns up, guys.